Thank you. Before I get started, could I ask for everybody who's a veteran to please stand for a moment? If you've ever served in any armed forces, ever, can we give them a round of applause? Disclaimer, I'm not a historian. Whenever you get invited to speak at the Yorktown Historic Society, you kind of like, what? So everything you see has been researched to the best of my ability, and if there is a mistake, please send me an email, okay? So anyway, thank you very much. With that said, by the way, I promised not to read my whole presentation, but I don't want to screw up my opening. Ready? Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? I am Specialist Walker, Commander of the Relief, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It is requested you remain silent and standing during the change into the guard. Thank you. With that said, today we're going to talk about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and those who stand guard over it. I apologize in advance. I found out 10 minutes ago I would be looking down instead of over my shoulder. So anyway. Hopefully those are the very first words you heard as you come around this corner. This picture is of one of the entrances to the tomb as you come right off the visitor's truck or the buses, okay? So those should be the only words you hear. It is a place of sacred honor, paying honor to those who paid the ultimate price, their lives in the military. What I'd like to do is cover today a history of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and those who stand guard over it. You're going to hear me talk about the tomb guards or the sentinels. It both means the same thing, okay? So we're going to talk about the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the history of it, how did they select the unknown and the unknowns now, because there's more than one. What was the process? Why did we have it? Why did we have one at all? The tomb itself, the history of it, the changes that took place, the sentinels, how we were selected, our training, and how the guard goes on through today. And then some questions. I also want to point out before I get started, I have a fellow tomb guard in the back, Lonnie Lagarde, so if you wouldn't mind. Thank you. You'll notice we have height differences. We'll cover that a little bit later. So anyway, welcome. So the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier started because of World War I, the greatest war, the biggest war there was, the war that was supposed to be the end of the war of all wars. It began on July 24th, 1914, and ended on 11 November, the 11th hour, on the 11th day in November 1918. Over 9 million combatants were involved. Just think of the scale of this. Over 40 nations were involved, and you can see a list of them there. All different theaters, a lot of different areas. People moved from one area to the other. I mean, this was massive. So what happened is with the end of World War I, the healing started. Over 70 million military were mobilized. If you don't, I'm going to just go through this for just a second, and I promise I won't read all the numbers, but I will read a lot of them. 70 million were mobilized. 4.7 million Americans were mobilized. That's in theater. That doesn't include everybody else involved. So when you see that number, that's not everybody. That's just the people that were actually in the war zones during those times. Over 117,000 Americans killed in action, 4,350 MIA, and over 44,000 Americans buried in European theaters, in European cemeteries. Has anyone been over there? I mean, just rows and rows of crosses and tombstones, isn't it? Just massive, very humbling. And this picture is actually one of the cemeteries in France as it looks today, not like it looked before. This is a pretty picture. I'll show you in a moment. So the first unknown soldier memorials were actually started by other countries, Great Britain, France, and Italy. And this is actually a picture of the one in France at the Arc de Triomphe. And it started in 1920, and they all started about 1920, 1921. This is actually a picture of one of them. So why did ours get started? Because President Wilson in 1921 signed into law that he would like to have a memorial for an unknown soldier and place his remains in Arlington National Cemetery. And he wanted it to be called the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. So the selection started in May of 1921. They were actually trying to do this right around for May 30th. Unfortunately, if you see the picture in here, this is what the cemeteries look like. Okay? If you notice, you probably can't read the tombstones very well. They were marked with little pieces of lead engrams, and they were also all different markings what they could do. So they weren't really sure which ones were unknown and which ones were known. As with a lot of military cemeteries, especially at this time, they tried to put all the unknowns in different sections. but they kept researching more, unburying them, looking for pieces. And again, sometimes saying, a person was buried here, it was a very small part of people because of the time. The other thing is, keep in mind, during this time, technology was much different than it is today. Didn't have DNA testing, didn't have refrigerated anything to bring bodies back, so very few bodies were brought back from World War I. And so the candidates were selected from the main 4 cemeteries in France, and they picked 2 from each one. Interesting story, Sergeant Edward Younger was the person who selected the unknown for World War I. This description, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Purple Hearts, doesn't go far enough. He served in many, many campaigns. He was highly decorated. So it wasn't just that he got awards, it was that he was participated in many, many of the large campaigns. So the idea was, when they were having him select somebody, he'd been to a lot of those places and maybe served with those people that were buried in those graveyards. So after the selection, the transport started in Paris, France on October 21st, 1921. France gave him their highest award, the Legion of Merit, the Legion of Honor. His body was transported from Europe to the United States on the USS Olympia. And then the USS Reuben James picked it up right off the coast of Virginia, and then took him up the Potomac River. Arrived on November 9th, 1921, lodged in state at the Capitol until November 11th. These are actual pictures of the transport. The picture over to the right is when they were taking out of the church from the services when he got the Legion of Honor Award. And the picture down below is actually a picture within the Capitol building when he was standing in state. Interesting fact, this is President Lincoln's cadaver. That's the stand in which his coffin was put, and that's one of the highest honors you can have in the Capitol building. And this is the one that he actually laid in state in. So the ceremony to actually entomb him was started on November 11th, 1921, the 3rd anniversary of World War I. Moved him from the Capitol to the amphitheater. This is a great picture because those soldiers walking next to the casket, 8 of them are Medal of Honor winners from that time. And Black Jack Pershing is there somewhere. I have another pic. I think he's actually the person in the back, all the way in the back on the left. You can see here with the kind of gray hair, who was in charge of the major part of the services over there before it. Another interesting fact that came out was over 1 million Americans listened on the radio. Do you think there were 1 million radios back in World War I? No. So people were gathered in churches, drugstores, and then the cannon fire from Fort Myer. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor and laid to rest on top of 2 inches of soil from the European battlefields. Think about this. They brought the battlefield to him. So the tomb, after the entombment, this is what it looked like in 1926 on the left-hand side, kind of flat. The cap you see on the right wasn't there. At this time in 1926, when you looked over the hill, if any of you, a lot of you have been in the military, there was an army. There were army barracks all along the road down below over the hill. And if we could have looked over the hill right now, we'd see all these barracks. As you know, the Army throws nothing away. They were supposed to be used for 2 or 3 years. My understanding is they were there for between 15 and 20 years. So the cemetery where you see the tombstones today were barracks before. And the story is that in the summertime when it was really hot, where would you like to go to cool off? Up over the hill next to Lee Mansion, and guess what was there? The tomb of the unknown soldier. And it was treated with a lot of disrespect at times because it was a great place to picnic. And that's how it started. Yep. And the guard wasn't there in the very beginning, so, and we'll cover the guard in a minute. And then in 1932, the cap was added, and I'd like to cover with you a little bit of history about the cap. So the cap was actually carved by the same carving group that did the Lincoln Memorial statue. Not the outside, but the inside. The same family group. I'm not sure it was the exact same carvers, but it was the same family. And the inscription that faces away from Washington, D.C. reads, "Here rest in honored glory, an unknown soldier known but to God." Because we don't know what happened, whose family he belonged to, have no idea. And tradition was, back when this was done in World War I, all records of the deceased was destroyed when they were picked. So when you think about all those coffins being lined up and they picked somebody, whoever they picked, whatever records they had from whatever cemetery it came from, were burned. There's 6 wreaths from the 6 major battle campaigns of World War and the three figures on the end, and you can see them on this side facing us, peace, victory, and valor. So then the next event that happens is World War II ends. 1946, Congress approved selecting an unknown soldier. If you don't mind, I'd really like to reflect the scale of what we're talking about and who these people represent. 12 million Americans mobilized. And every time you hear that, just go ×2. That's how many people were involved that were American citizens. 405,000 Americans killed in action. 78,750 missing in action. Think about why the number is so high. The ships that sank, we couldn't get back. The prisoner of wars everywhere and all the different places. The people that just, were abandoned, that died. We just, again, the technology wasn't there to bring back very many remains. So, and the DNA wasn't there, so we weren't really sure. But a lot of the MIAs were ships that got destroyed. Think about all the Marines out there, all the different services, the Navy, all that. That's where it came from. Also, researching this was kind of interesting. MIA also includes those people who went to prisoner of war camps that just disappeared. Because there were prisoner of wars that you may have seen them today, but you don't know what happened to them. And record keeping wasn't what it is today. And you'll notice as we go along, we have a lot better record keeping. That was what it was from. So there were 78,000, which is a huge number, missing in action. The selection came from two different theaters, the European theater and the Pacific theater, which are very large battle areas, lots of military, a lot of people involved. And the original internment date was set for Memorial Day, 1951. Anybody know what happened around 1951? Korean conflict broke out. So they thought it would be very disrespectful to do a wreath laying and another ceremony with an unknown in the middle of a conflict. And my dad, by the way, was in Korea also. So they postponed it due to Korea. This picture is actually a picture that might fit a little bit later in the presentation. This is one of the final selection pictures where they've actually laid them out again. But they actually started to do this. So what happened in World War II is, so from World War II, the selection process went like this. The transatlantic unknown candidate selection was on May 12, 1958. From 26 different unknown soldiers, was selected by Major General Edward O'Neill, who was very involved in the theaters at that time, which is why he was selected. And you'll find out next that, so they picked an officer for the first person, for the one theater, and for the other theater, they picked a hospital corpsman, William R. Charette, U.S. Navy Medal of Honor winner. There weren't that many Medal of Honors at this point. So when you hear that, there were very, very few of them. So these are very important people who contributed. So he placed, so this actually happened in Hawaii. And you'll notice these dates all kind of fit together. So World War I, the Atlantic, the Pacific, and then the Korean unknown. The Korean War, again, had just ended. Over 1.78 million Americans mobilized, 36,000 killed in action, 2,500 missing in action. And again, think about missing in action being prisoner of wars also that never got heard from again in the back of your mind. It's not just the people who got shot. It's the people who got taken in prisoner of war, and it may have been a whole group that walked away and we never saw them again. In that selection. He was selected by Master Sergeant Ned Lyle, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest honor, from 4 primary soldiers. And so this selection, the Korean selection, along with the 2 from World War II, were moved together. So you'll see the next picture takes us all together. So then the final selection happened on the USS Blandy. The 2 to the right are the World War II. The one to the left is the Korean. And so the same person then selected between the 2 from World War II who the final candidate would be for World War II. So at this point, one of the caskets that you see in front of you were then buried at sea right off the Cape of Virginia, because it all started up. All the shipment again was up the Potomac River to D.C. This is a picture of the double interment. They're both, you can see both caskets laying in state. We don't know from which service they came, so it's a joint service guard all the way around it. They arrived on May 27th, 1958, laid in state till May 30th, and again, the Lincoln Catafalque was moved back and forth. It was kind of cool because if you think about how respectful they were, they moved the casket back and forth they changed the cataphracts every night out of due respect. They wanted to make them both feel just as important. Kind of a cool detail. And then the journey to Arlington started. Any of you been in DC in May? Kind of hot, looks kind of sunshiny. This was May. And they're moving along very slowly, and back then the uniforms were really heavy, so there's a lot of sweating going on to do this. So going down the road. I've been in Washington when it's hot. So here's a picture of the double internment. And then the next conflict and war that we wanted to address was the Vietnam unknown. So at this point we have World War I, World War II, and Korea. And now the Vietnam War has ended. I don't mind sharing with you, my dad was also in Vietnam, infantry and chopper pilot 3 times. Sorry, he died recently. 3.4 million Americans were mobilized, 58,000 Americans killed in action, 2,626 missing in action. Now, we're at a time now where there's better IDs, right? And we're able to take care of bodies a lot better, transport them, identify them, treat them correctly, bring them back home. So there were very few missing in action at this point. And it actually took until 1972 before they actually found some remains that couldn't be pretty closely identified. However, this person also was, when this was actually an airplane crash where they found the body, and there were other bodies around it, which is why this ended up being being the person selected. Transported home again with the U.S. Brennan, laid in state, and then was laid to rest at the tomb. And here's actually a picture of the interment on May 28th. Immediately after the interment, there were a couple different families that thought this person could potentially be their loved one. It wasn't just one. There were several families that were investigating it. Because where his body was found, there were some other bodies there too, and they were trying to figure out which one was whom. DNA testing wasn't quite there yet. They'd started experimenting with it, but there just wasn't enough proof to be able to say who was whom. However, after it continued to go on, they kept eliminating the other people, and they thought, wow, this could be, Captain Michael Blassie. So eventually, they showed enough evidence, and if you notice, the request started in 1998. It took a lot longer than that to get, he was buried in 84, 86. It took until almost 10 years later before they would do this. So again, because of technology. So on May 13th, 1998, he was disinterred and placed in a casket. The DNA testing did prove it was him. They took him back home to Missouri and buried him at the barracks. And so the crypt in the middle has been changed to be a representative for the missing in action. So if you go to visit there today, the inscription reads, "Honoring and keeping faith with America's missing serviceman." So the tomb today, this is what it looks like. This isn't too old of a picture, but it's what it looks like today. You see the World War I with the cap on top, World War II over to the left, Korea to the right, and the missing in action in the middle. This is actually a tomb guard walking down the mat, and the black thing that they're walking on is actually called the mat. Okay? And you'll notice he does have a bayonet sticking up, so it is definitely completely dressed out. So let's talk about some changes in the guard. This picture was 1930s, so it wasn't too long after it started. In 1921, there was no guard. In 1925, a civilian guard started. And then in 1926, the military guard started. I've tried to find out some more information about this, but all I can think about is there's an Army base sitting over the hill. There's Fort Myer up the hill. The Marine Corps is over this way, and somebody else is over this way. How did they ever pick who was going to guard it? So I don't know if it was selected or not, but my understanding was it was always Army. And then in 1926, the military guard started, and then in 1937, the 24-hour guard started. For those of you who were in the military, my understanding was that they still did the guard change where they stopped and said, passing on orders, sir, and they passed on the guard, even though it might have been a little less formal than it is today. So, okay. And then in 1948, the old guard took it over. The Old Guard is one of the oldest serving military units, or the oldest that was established in 1784. And it's called the 3rd U.S. Infantry. So a little bit about the Sentinels. Wait a minute, before we get started on that, I was a Sentinel for about 18 months. I'm badge holder 212. And I just want to tell you, as a summary, my memory of the tomb goes like this. It was hot, it was cold, it was windy, and it was rainy. Okay? So when you see these pictures, I think it'll kind of reflect. Okay? If you've ever been there, there's a little box over to the right. No, we did not go in the box because it was cold, or rainy, or anything like that. So just want to start off with that. There are 3 reliefs. Typically, you're on for 24 hours. Actually, you're on for 24 hours. And the relief is made up of between 6 and 9 people, depending on how many people we can keep at that moment. It is pretty physically demanding. But normally, your relief was 7 or 8 people. Our other duty was training. Training because our standard of performance was excellence. And our standard of performance was excellence. And our standard of performance was perfection. Got it? So you're always trying to get better at what you were doing. It was very much in training. Walking back and forth across the mat, it's 21 steps, stop, face DC, stop for 21 seconds, go back, count to 21, walk 21 steps, same thing, every round on 21 steps. That had to do with the 21-gun salute, as you may know, and that's the number of cannons you could put on a battleship at one point on the original ships. So it was the very highest honor. So it was right around 21 steps. 24-hour shifts, and then the change of the guard. In the summertime, it was done every 30 minutes, and in the wintertime, every hour. Can you guess why? Did somebody say tourist? Yes, yes. So in the summertime, the guards changed were every 30 minutes. In the wintertime, once an hour. If you were a tomb guard, you almost wanted it to be an hour, because by the time you really got into your rhythm, you'd rather do an hour. And a half an hour, you were kind of, at the moment, you were like really getting into your stride, right? It was time for guard change again. So but it was actually a great experience. And then we also did reef ceremonies. So a lot of people said, well, you work for half an hour. There's 6 of you. You're off for 3 or 4 hours. Not. We had reef ceremonies in between, especially in the summertime. Every veterans group you can think of, individuals, and different parts of the cemeteries had different generations buried in them. So that was what we did. It was really an honor to be able to do all of this. It's so cool. Excuse me one second. And then the picture on the lower right-hand side, I just wanted to show this to you. We did train at night if you were a new person under training. It wasn't all done during the daylight hours. We didn't just stick you up there and say good luck. So there's a whole lot of training taking place before you could do this. So tomb guard requirements, you had to be active Army. You had to be able to meet the physical demands. I'm 6'1". My relief, which was the 3rd relief, was between 5'11" and 6'1". Second relief was 6'1" to 6'3". And first relief was the really tall guys like him. Right? Yep, right on. So anyway, I'm sorry, this is the first time I've had a chance to have another tomb guard in the same room. It's actually fun. So anyway, so in physical demands, it was very physical. You can imagine it being hot out there in DC in the summer. And no, we don't go in the booth and drink water. You're up there for your a shift is called a walk. In the wintertime, it definitely got cold. Yeah, your fingers got cold. Yeah. And the wind blew a lot. I mean, when you see some of this stuff later, the wind, I only weighed so much. It was definitely different. And it was very physically demanding. And then actually walking was really hard on your ankles and your legs. And we did a lot of other stuff outside of this. We weren't just tomb guards. We were also in the Army. And then you had to volunteer or be selected to volunteer. And then you had to pass all the tests. We had to learn a lot about the cemetery. You were in the Army, so you had to know all the stuff you have to know for your normal job, but you'd also need to know about the cemetery and why it was important, who was buried there, a lot of statistics around that. So here's new man training. Brings back interesting memories. So in this point, you can see the badge holder. He's got a badge on his shoulder. Everybody who doesn't, that's why they don't. But this is actually some training taking place downstairs in the guard quarters. They're walking them through with some practices on how to hold the weapons, hold them straight. It's a very, and I'll show you a demo at the end of this, by the way. I won't be doing it. the change. What's kind of funny to me every time I see this picture is I can't picture somebody who's on the first relief, which is 6'2", 6'3", with that weapon with a bayonet in their hands. I think it would be going through the ceiling about now. So I think this was actually a semi-staged picture. But bringing to mind, there's 6 people here, and odds are only 1 or 2 of them are going to make it through new man training. So when I went through, they trained 5 of us, and 2 of us made it. The next group, when I helped train people about 6 or 9 months later, we started with 4 and only 1 made it. So it was normally a 2 to 4 ratio was doing it. So the reason I show you this is the catacombs that are right behind the tomb. This is where a lot of practice takes place, at least when I was there. We had mats underneath it because during the day you can't be out practicing and training, so you trained underneath here. This was also where they stored bodies during some of the wars when the ground was frozen in Arlington Cemetery. So I heard especially during this was different at the end of the Civil War, but there were things here already. Uniform standards, it's real simple. Perfection, perfection, perfection. Got it? When I was putting together this deck for the first time about 6 months ago, you get these memory flashbacks. The guy with the masking tape in his hand. Do you remember the masking tape? Huh? Okay. We bought every lint brush you could ever buy. I mean, because we had to get the lint off our uniforms before we ever went on duty every single time. So we have no, we're poor NCOs, right? We were buying lint brushes all over the place. They did not work. The only thing that worked was, that's right, masking tape. So some purchasing agent saw Tomb Guard purchasing 15 cases of masking tape. This is why, okay? Yep. That and we taped our ties, but that's another day. So it just worked. And then also we had a press close by. You're obviously pressing your uniform in between. What was kind of nice was, since I was a small guy, my uniform only wrinkled so much, but the bigger guys, they would sweat so bad in the summer. It was great. So, true story. Again, uniform standards of perfection. When you see the disc on the right-hand side with the infantry unit, the infantry crossarms, you would not want to use this in a regular military unit. We have taken every bit of finish off of it. It's been spun over and over again to look bright. So ours, you couldn't really use them again. The shoes on the right-hand side, they're built up about this far. And two reasons. One was to get your feet off the marble because it was so hot. And the second reason was inside the corners are some metal plates that are clickers. So whenever you turn, and if you've ever been there and you hear this, that's the heels coming together. Okay? No, those are not patent leather. Those are called spit shines. There's a reason they are called spit shines. Anybody care to guess? Yes, we spit and we shine. That's right, right. Okay, now the candid truth was, if you had actually been in the military, which I think most of you said you were, you did use spit shine, but you also used a little water, right? We all cheated? Yeah, you couldn't spit that much. But this is actually that. And the favorite thing was when you went out on a guard duty and it was a beautiful day outside and you wore one of your 3 or 4 sets of beautiful spit shines and it started raining. It was just an awesome experience in life. So absolutely awesome experience. And then so then the next step is you've gone through training, you've actually started doing walks and tours, and you're actually participating on a regular basis. You're doing some reef ceremonies. Then it comes time for you to try out for the badge. That typically happened between 3 and 6 months after you got there. And you started to have to really show what you were. If you weren't patriotic, you didn't make it. It didn't matter whatever else happened. There had to be some spirit inside you that said you cared what you were doing. We made sure that if you didn't, you'd find some way to fail. We just didn't want you. The second thing was you had to learn about the tomb and a lot of information around it, be able to answer questions about Arlington National Cemetery. At this point, your uniform ought to look really good. I mean, like excellent. And we've got to be able to trust you. And that was another thing, because we're a team. Everybody's working together all the time. You can imagine during those guard changes when you're trying to click at the exact moment, you've got to trust the other person, right? And later you'll see a guard change where the weapon's flying around. You'd want to be able to trust that guy who's changing the guard, wouldn't you? Yep. And then a knowledge test. And basically this was really pass-fail. If you didn't make it, you didn't make it. And fortunately, when I was there, nobody didn't make it, but it would have happened. So this is the Tomb Guard badge. There's around 540 of them that have ever been awarded. It's the higher? What are we up to? 700? Okay, so we're badge holders 212. I'm sorry? 680, thank you. So I'm badge holder 212 and 249. So it's been how many years? We won't go there. so it's pretty, other than the astronaut award, it's the least awarded badge in the military. So I wanted to walk you through a change in the guard and then show you part of a change in the guard. They walk out immediately, and then they do a weapons inspection. This weapon inspection is actually a real weapons inspection. You see them doing the tilt. They actually spin the weapon around when they're checking it. You can tell a really confident commander of the relief, which is the sergeant standing there, versus a new commander of the relief by how close the bayonet gets to the guy's hat. Okay. By the way, this is done in the rain, the snow, and the wind. It doesn't stop. So how would you like to be the guard over to the right on a windy day with a bayonet flying around? Yeah, right, you better trust the person, okay? Do we do a little bit slower when it's windy? Yes. Passing on orders. I actually know the sergeant in the middle. This was a true picture, and if you notice, it's raining a little bit. Yep. And no, there's not sunglasses on at this day. The rain's coming down. Do you think the pants are wet by now? Yeah, shoes? Yeah. And you got those white gloves on? Do you think they help you hold onto the weapon when it's raining this hard? No. And we just keep going. And then we do the march off. And if you'll notice, right across the top, everybody's about the same height. Kind of cool. And all the steps are in step. We also did reef ceremonies. I just want to give you a couple of pictures of them. It was really an honor to do reef ceremonies because you knew they were there to honor a group or a family or an organization. I mean, it was all day long, especially in the summertime. It was just an absolute honor. So the reason I show you this picture of the Sentinel is, does he look like he's sweating? Okay. Remember, heat, rain. Yep. We really didn't consider you, I don't know, I think there might have been a badge holder who made it to badge holder without getting bit in the face by a mosquito or something and having their face swell up really bad during the guard change, but I don't think I met the person. I personally was, I don't know why, but I attract mosquitoes. I personally had been bitten several times. And no, you don't get to go in the booth. No, there's nobody who brings out and gives you some spray. You just keep going. So, and yes, we did use insect spray. And you'll notice he's not smiling. The only person that could make you smile was another tomb guard. Not your mother, not your sister, not your wife, anybody. It was only another tomb guard. Another Frazie's fun season, wintertime. This is a true picture. It was not set. It actually snowed that much while I was up there that day. I was actually there during one of the blizzards in 78 or 79 when the snow was this deep. And they carved out a path for us on the mat about this wide. And of course, you knew we couldn't stop, right? I mean, you know, it was just inside us. We were like, okay, because it's so hard, we're not going to stop. And we kept going. But the snow got almost that deep. It was pretty cool. Actually, it was cold. And to this day, the Guard continues 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Okay. What I'd like to do now is show you a quick change in the Guard.
Halt! Halt! Ready! Height! Pass on your orders. Halt and order. 3 men as directed. Order. Action. Go. Ready. Height. Reset. Halt. Height. Shoulder. Halt. Halt! 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 Forward! Halt!
Before I take any questions, I wanted to share a couple personal stories with you, if you wouldn't mind. The first one was when you were on duty. When I was on duty, there was usually a security guard over here to the left. So when you see the mat here, there was usually a security guard there. And about probably 50% of the time, there was a fellow tomb guard standing there. And the reason was is you were always trying to help each other, give corrections and stuff. The weapon would go too far left or right, that type of thing. So you were always getting somebody to give you a little bit of direction. This happened to me twice. The first time, so you're walking along and you're always, you're not smiling or anything and you are looking straight ahead, but you've got peripheral vision. I see a kid running through the chains on the left-hand side. I'm 6'1", with a 3/4 inch buildup, with a weapon in my hand, with a bayonet on it. Okay? I mechanically turn around to the left and I scream, "Halt!" What do you think the little kid said? Nope. Mommy! Mommy! So fortunately, so this was an easy time because my fellow tomb guard was running across the chains, the security guard was running across the chains, and the parents were screaming. So it was, got them off. Okay. Second time it happened, actually this was when I was I don't think I was off new man when this happened. I think it was right before I got my badge. So I'm scared I'm going to get fired from the tomb plus everything else when I did this. So, but secondly, they do tell you what to do, but you just, really? So anyway, so the second time it happened, I was a badge holder. I've been there for a long time. And so I see another kid coming across the chains. And the security guard I know was right there. And one of my fellow tomb guards was sitting right down there at the end because he was actually giving me some directions when this happened. So the kid rushes through the chains, starts heading towards the tomb. And really, your job is to keep them from touching the tomb. Okay, and we're not going to kill anybody or hurt anybody, but our job really is to keep them from touching the tomb. So I did my normal stop, halt, and the kid just keeps running. And I'm like, oh crap. So, oh yeah, and you can see people starting to run to help, right? And some people are screaming, stay back. But it's all going on like in 15 seconds, right? And the kid just keeps running towards it. And I'm like, okay, this is great, this is great. So I take the weapon in the right-hand side, and I systematically, without blinking or changing my facial expression, grabbed him by the back of his collar. I only had to go 2 steps before somebody took it. But it was like, I tried to stay as mechanical as humanly possible. I think if you had recorded my face that day, it went something like this. After I'd screamed, halt. Okay? And all you could hear the parents say when they got the kid back was, thank you for not hurting him or something. Oh, he didn't get hurt. Oh, they were saying, oh, he didn't get hurt. That's what it was, he didn't get hurt. And the third thing is, so did you get the sense that, Juan and I were probably pretty cocky tomb guards that day? Huh? Right? I mean, you're sitting there walking them out. You think you're pretty cocky because you did what you did and you became a tomb guard? Not. What happened was, the moment you started getting cocky, there'd be some family who showed up whose kid was buried over the hill. And they'd be standing right there talking while you're guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier. Huh? You can't be cocky. Not for a second. I mean, it happened over and over again. And what you would try to do as best you could, and sometimes it would be family who raid, so what a typical situation would be, they'd lay a reef, and then they'd hang around after they laid the reef, if it was a veterans group. And somebody in the veterans group, family was probably buried over the hill, down in one of the areas. And so we would try as hard as you could, you saw the end, you come off and you're starting to walk off at the end. You try to get downstairs, hand somebody your rifle, and have somebody try and find the family, because you want to offer them a tour of the tomb guard quarters or show them the Hall of Honor, which is above it. So when you see those pictures of those guys walking the tomb, they're not cocky. It's happening to them too very frequently, because we know our job is to honor those who paid the ultimate price, who can't be here to be with their families, if that makes sense. Okay. With that said, I'd like to thank you, and do you have any questions?
All right, before we ask the questions, I just want to give you a few instructions on the questions. I'll be standing here in the back with the microphone. If you have a question of Mr. Taylor, let me bring the microphone to you so that we need the microphone so we can get the audio on the filming that we're doing. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and I will bring the microphone to you.
And also I have a backup here, so please.
Sir, thank you. 2 quick questions. The alley, the plantings or trees along the backdrop behind the tomb, Are they a hornbeam, or what is the type of plant or tree?
No, I don't know.
It looks very European.
I don't know.
Okay. Next question. You answered the situation of encounters with individuals, but the time when you were on your own, mentally, physically, or spiritually, what was your most powerful moment?
The one that comes to mind is it was in the fall or winter. I remember it clearly. There was a very large family there that had. So I'm a tomb guard from 78 to 79. So the Vietnam War has only been over so long, and so there's a very large family that came to visit one of their loved ones that was buried in Arlington National Cemetery, and evidently they had just come back from visiting Dad, and they're standing there talking about it right to my left. And so I would say that was it. And it's like, I'm not here for me, I'm here for the people that paid the ultimate price. I would say that's what really inside gets you. So.
During your hours off, when you weren't in front of the tomb, what were some of the rules and expectations that you had in your private
Oh, the tomb guard
barracks?
legends. Okay, got it. So the truth is, I didn't smoke, so you can check that one off, okay? But yes, we did date. Yes, I'm sure we went to some party where they served alcohol if we were over 21. No, we actually were normal Army also. So when we weren't on duty, we were doing the other things that other soldiers had to do when they weren't pulling 24-hour duty. To answer your question, you get off about 6 o'clock in the morning. You went home, you went back to the barracks, had breakfast, dropped your uniforms off, immediately started prepping for the next shift, the next day you were going to go on. And there was always training going on. So about that moment, you'd come back and do training with either your group or some new men. And so you would normally do training that day, and then you'd try and take the second day off right before the shift usually. And we moved it around based on that. So there was always a lot of training going on. And plus we were regular Army, so when we had to qualify for weapons or stuff like that, we had to do them on our days off. Yep. But it was very responsible. Yep. And I'm sorry, and to answer your question, you had to really exemplify the highest standards of behavior. And if you got arrested, anything crazy, when I was in, we always called it Sprechen Sie Deutsch, because you'd be transferred to Berlin like within 48 hours. So I actually went on vacation one time. This is a true story. I took my first vacation in a very long time because I transferred from I was in the 101st for 2 years, and then was able to apply for the old guard. I learned smartly, if you travel overseas enough and you freeze enough, it's probably time to go to Virginia and enjoy Virginia. Plus, I want to go to college. One of my first vacations I ever took after I became a tomb guard, I came back and one of the people on the relief were gone, and what they said was he's enjoying Germany this week. So, and actually that was when I was with the Presidential Marching Platoon. So, but Ganzi. So, yep. Yes, sir.
First, thank you for your service. Second, I heard someplace or read someplace that, and I'm sure it's true, you never go inside. And during the hurricane that was coming up towards Washington, Congress adjourned, Washington shut down. You guys never stopped. Is
I
that true?
don't know of any time there wasn't a tomb guard on duty. I can't answer that factually, but to the best of my knowledge, no, it's never been unguarded. I was there during the blizzard of '78, where we actually got stuck down there for an extra 8 hours. They couldn't get people into it to feed us. We actually had sea rations, which are not what they have today. No, it's never been unguarded. Yep.
Are there any women guards?
There were some women guards, and I actually have a slide on it. There's actually been 4 or 5 of them. 5? 4? 4. Thank you. I was up to 3. So, thank you. There's actually been 4.
One just left about 16 months ago.
There you go. Yes, ma'am. And they had to meet the same physical requirements.
So I know that you're walking 21 steps, you're turning and counting I mean, you're standing there for 21
Seconds.
seconds?
You counted
So are you
21.
just constantly counting to 21 in your head the whole time that
Interesting
you're walking?
question. So remember
And
I
do you
talked,
do that later in the
Yeah.
day?
I do pause. You did count in your head, but you've learned to count to a certain rhythm. And so I won't tell you I counted every single time, but I probably did. But yes. But it was always different because every day brought a new challenge. I mean, you had different weather every day. It affected how you did the job. You were teamed with a different person during the guard change because you want to make sure you clicked at the same time they did. You had different sergeants of the guard. We only had 2 people who normally was relief commanders that changed the weapon, that did the weapon stuff. But it was always different every day. So I mean, it never was boring. So.
How many uniforms and pairs of shoes did you have?
I had 4 or 5 sets of blues, and I usually kept 3 uniforms perfect, and the other 2 were backups. We actually had our own tailor at Arlington, at Fort Myer for our uniforms, because our uniforms were always a little bit tighter than everybody else's. And when we cinched it together, we actually wore a conga band underneath here. And then it was taped, your tie was taped down. What else would you add to that?
We can't disclose that.
I will say this, the gloves that you see them wear, the white gloves, we wore them all year long. And I think today they're wearing the black ones too for heat. But we actually wore the regular white ones all 20, no matter how cold or hot it was, with glove liners. And it was very hard to hold on to a weapon with glove liners on. Yeah.
Did you ever have any encounters with wildlife, deer, raccoons, anything?
Now, a couple squirrels going around, but it's Arlington National Cemetery. The squirrels don't survive very long. So, yeah, no.
There was a raccoon that showed up every once in a while down there.
Do we have any other questions?
How'd you keep your hat on when it was
Oh,
windy?
good question. You ready? Yeah, it was definitely a fitted hat. But there was, when you took your hat off, there was definitely a ring going around your head. Yeah, that hat was not coming off.
You looked like you had a mason jar lid on your head.
I'm sorry?
You looked like
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, definitely had a mason jar on your head. Absolutely.
And I see another question.
The washout rate, and if a person did make it on the first try, did they have to wait for 6 months, a year, or that was it?
I'm not aware that anybody ever got to recycle to try out again. I'm not aware of anybody who ever got to recycle. So did you all ever let anybody recycle?
There have been people that have come back down there. They left maybe because of medical reasons and then were given out.
Oh, if it was a temporary medical, thank you. If it was a temporary medical reason, yes. If it wasn't a temporary medical reason or other type of problem, probably not. So yeah, thank you. Good example.
In the 24-hour period, you said you're on for a half an hour walking. Do you go back in that 24-hour period for different tours?
Oh, great question. So how often are you up, for example? So in the summertime, the guard changes every 30 minutes. And so we said there were 7 on each relief. So theoretically speaking, that day when you come to work, there should be 7 other people taking shifts too. But 2 other people one person might be on vacation, another person might be off shooting guns and playing Army. So you might only have 5 people that day. So you've got 1 up, and then when you're off, you go to a reef ceremony, and then the next person comes on. So you might only be off, for maybe 2 hours or an hour and a half, realistically. So you'd be cycling through 5 or 6 times in the summertime. There were times where we had a lot of people out where there were only 3 people walking that day, really. I mean, you just kept going. But normally it was at least 4 were walking at any one given moment. So good question. So, and remember, we're sweating, so we're ruining our uniforms, right? And the spits are getting screwed up every single time. I mean, especially in the summer, they just start melting. It's Washington, D.C., right? So, thank you, Hershey Bard. So.
What if there was lightning in the area?
So if it was really bad, we would go in the box. And there's a box over to the left. That was typically the only time we would go into the box, is whenever it was lightning or during ceremonies. By the way, we had a lot of people helping us. We weren't normally that much by ourselves. There was always usually another guard out there, and during daylight hours, especially in the summer, there were security guards.
When we were there one time, the guard stopped, people were talking, and they were talking loud, and the guard stopped, and he turned, and I forgot if he just said silent, or he said something to the effect of, you gotta be quiet.
Yeah, I don't remember the exact saying, but there is a saying you had to say.
Oh,
when
that
people
really
were
startled
talking.
me. But I also wanted to ask you, did you have any mishaps? Like, you didn't click at the right time, your gun didn't go the right way, or, mishaps
That's
like
a
that?
secret. The reason, I'm sorry? You're learning. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to his presentation next time. Yeah. To answer your question, that's why you practice so much. And if you were ever at a guard change and you heard a click a little bit later, it normally if you looked on their chest, they probably all didn't have badges on. There might have been a newer person on. But the other thing is we are human beings. We are physically, you do have physical issues sometimes, and we did press on. So there were some times where it didn't go exactly perfect. But whenever there was the perfect one, like the one you heard, I mean, it's just, bam, and you could tell. And that was usually a good day anyway. So.
All right. Thank you, Terry, for super educational and enlightening talk, please.